Welcome back to Master Guitar, where you can learn how to master guitar. Alright, it is 2:57. Kimchi is looking at me. I'm feeling very guilty. Hi, Kimmy! So, I spent most of the night blasting on my 2600. So now it's time to talk about the guitar. Alright, so one of the things we talked about a couple of different things. We've talked about the pentatonic scale. Okay, so now where do we go from here? So we talked about in the warm-up sequence is the C major scale, or the Ionian mode, and that, of course, we start down at, well, it wasn't the C major scale, it was just the major scale. So that's a sequence of notes. We're going to go over now the let's go over the intervals. This is the first thing you learned when you got the Mel Bay How to Play Guitar series. Do they even sell that anymore, I wonder? Let's talk now about the intervals on the guitar. We've talked about them a little bit, but let's go over it because now we're really going to need it. And of course, from the C, which is on the 8th fret, 6th string, from C to C sharp is a half step. That's on, like, after you get the fingers of the hand, the strings 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then you got the obligatory. This is a half step. And then from C to D, which is 8 to 10, they'd say that's a whole step. I thought, wow, that's information I will never use. Actually, it's really important. And I didn't know that for a long time. Because your major scale is created out of a series of whole steps and half steps. So now we're going to get into the formulas of the major scale. This is step one of learning music theory. Music theory is like a joke that people know the punchline and they tell the first half of the joke and everyone sits around and laughs and you listen to it and you're like, I'm lost. What are you talking about? It goes back to the guild system back in feudal Europe. And what the guilds were is the guilds were a group of people who all got together and say, hey, if we do certain things, we can protect our livelihood from people trying to break in on the outside. So what they did is, among other things, you'd have tools and techniques that they wouldn't explain to people on the outside. And just to make matters worse, they would all come up with their own code words for what they're doing. Music was no different. So that's why we have these different, whole step, half step, and then etc. Suffice it to say the words note of the scale is missing from what I'm saying. So I'm talking about the first, that's the first note of the scale. In this case being C. C would be the first note of the scale, or the first. D is the second note of the scale, so we call that the second. E is the third, F is fourth, G is fifth, A is sixth. Very important note to the scale, by the way. Your B is the seventh. The sequence to that is, as you can tell, C to D, that's a whole step. D to E is a whole step. E to F is a half step. F to G is whole. G to A is whole. A to B is whole. And B to C is half step. Whole, half. Whole, half. That'll get very important as we're going along, because at some point in the future I'm going to start hitting you with chord leading tendencies, and that has to do with the circle of fifths. And if you follow the circle of fifths and you notice that there's a rotating pattern throughout it of which mode takes the first sharp, which mode takes the second sharp, those are your darkest modes. And as it goes through, the last one to take a sharp is your strongest tone, therefore your brightest. So we'll go into that in depth later on in the future, not right now. Let's talk about the major scale. 8, 10, 12, 8, 10, 12. 9, 10, 12, 9, 10, 12. 10, 12, 13, 10, 12, 13. So what we did is we've gone over a little bit of how the scale is constructed, that whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And the notes between is now you've got, this is why the major scale is the way it is. So now let's talk about the related minor, also called the relative minor. In that case, remember me talking about the sixth, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 and then the half. That last whole step before the half step, that is your relative minor. Doesn't matter what the scale is, whatever that sixth note is, or sixth, whatever the sixth is, that's the relative minor. So G major, yeah, switch to that pickup. The relative minor is E minor. Same notes. So in this case, with the C major scale, it's C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Or we could do the A minor. And that is A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Just remember that's a phone number too. 1-800-A-B-C-D-E-F-G. And I've already told that joke, so I won't repeat it again. Okay, so that's the C major scale. Now when we get into the modes, and we're about to talk about the modes right now, no more delaying, you now have the modes. This is your first mode, is C Ionian. Now this is what blows my mind, is I can talk to concert pianists, I can talk to, classical cello players, I can talk to people who are first chair violin, and I start talking about the diatonic modes like Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Aeolian. I mentioned the Aeolian mode, and they're what? And it blows my mind that your average metalhead knows more about music theory than a concert violinist. Tell me if that doesn't blow your mind. So what's so important about the minor scale and the major scale is we're going to be talking about scale formulas to alter a scale, and this is what everything boils down to, is your diatonic modes and your scale formulas. So in this case, the scale formula I gave you was what? Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. As we go through the scales, that's going to rotate around, and I'll be talking about that more. Okay, so everything that I've been teaching you has been coming to this point. At this point, all the sweep picking, triads, and arpeggios is all, we're taking elements, and things get very fluid between the scales, the chords, and the arpeggios. And so when we start getting into like a minor 7 arpeggio, at that point you start saying, wow, there's not a whole lot of difference between that and a scale. Let's work on that for now. Work on that, study, keep this in mind, study it, write it out as many times as you can until you got it memorized, the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And then we're talking about the Ionian mode being the C major. C Ionian is C major. Aeolian is A minor, A-E-O-L-I-A-N. So when you hear me drop into that minor, the major 7th right there, remember half step, whole step from, if we were taking the in this case, we're borrowing that note from the E major scale for the A minor. That makes it what's called harmonic minor. We'll be getting to that soon, so study what you got, practice what you got, hold what you got. And we will see you next time. Like, subscribe, comment, and make sure you leave a comment saying what kind of content you want to see. What are your needs as a player? How can I help you? I'm doing all this for free because, you know, I'm a guitar teacher at heart. I taught guitar for many years, about 20 years, maybe 21. And, you know, I produced a whole host of shredders that went out there in a time when there were no shredders, and they're probably out there still carrying the torch. Go, Josh, go! And so I want you to be the next one. So remember, don't settle for good enough. You never quite make your goals, so if you settle for good enough, you're going to end up being not good enough. If you settle for being the best and you don't make it, you'll still be a lot better than someone who just settles for good enough. Anyway, like, subscribe, comment. We'll see you next time.